Good morning, everyone. Welcome to this short 30-minute session. Tim Baker's my name, and I'm going to talk a little bit about job design. And I think post-COVID is a perfect opportunity for us to start to ask ourselves the question, is the way we design jobs actually helping to improve individual performance? And I would suggest no. And I think there are a couple of things I'd like to say about this in our short time together this morning. And the first thing I'd say is that when you think about the job description and you think about job specification, the whole purpose of those instruments in the workplace is to put a boundary around what people do. And I think by putting a boundary around what people do, it stops people being able to see beyond those boundaries. And I think this creates a lot of problems, particularly in communication. So I want to talk a little bit about this morning and give you some food for thought about how you might improve your own design of jobs. I want to particularly touch on the concept of job crafting, which has been around for a couple of decades now, but what's happened is that we haven't given it much real credit. And I think now is the time for us to really look at job crafting and how it can actually improve performance in the workplace. So I'll share my slides and we'll get stuck into it. Okay, so first of all, in case you don't know who I am, just give you a quick overview. You can see I write books. I've got 14 books out, including the latest book, The Future of Human Resources, Unlocking Human Potential. Now, what I'm going to share with you really this morning comes straight out of that book. You can see I also give keynote addresses and workshops, and I also play rugby in the Golden Oldies competition in Brisbane. And you can see that, that chap chasing me there, you can see why I'm moving so quickly. You'd be running very quickly too if he was chasing you. All right, let's get into it. So a little bit of understanding around what is job crafting and how can it improve performance. Now, job crafting, as I said, has been around for a while, but I don't think really, I think we've been sort of giving it lip service, but I think so dominant is the job specification in workplaces is it's prevented us from really fully expressing the benefits of job crafting. And I'll talk about that obviously throughout our session. So I'm going to talk about the proactive paradox to start with, because I think it's very relevant to what we're talking about. I'm going to talk about job crafting, spend most of my time doing that. And then I've got a special offer for you because you're here. You'll get a copy of the slides, a copy of the recording at the end of this presentation. So let's get stuck into it and have a look at it from the start. So I talk about the proactive paradox. Now, I know the word paradox is used very much and perhaps it's overused, but what is it? I guess the best way to describe a paradox is to think about what comes first. So for example, if we're thinking about the chicken and the egg, which comes first? Is it the egg or is it the chicken? And of course, it's a paradox because obviously both depend on each other. So when I talk about the proactive paradox, I'm talking about employees being proactive, that is, showing independent judgment, prudent initiative, being autonomous and not depending too much on their leader. So let me talk about that and share something with you. So this is the proactive paradox, or at least this is the process. So I'm just going to walk you through this and give you a sense of how it works. It's a very real phenomenon in the world of work, and I'm sure you have been on the receiving end in some place in your own working life. So the starting point is when you're a leader and you come into an organization or when you're leading a team, you probably want your employees to show their initiative in the right place at the right time, of course. You want people to back themselves. You want them to show independent judgment. That would be a fairly sensible thing to expect. Now, what's also interesting about that is that the people that you lead also want to show initiative. Not everybody, but most. So basically, to start with, everybody's on the same page. Managers want employees to show their independent judgment. And of course, employees want to show independent judgment, and something goes wrong. And what happens is the leader invites people. This is stage 2. Leaders invite people to show initiative. And so they might, for example, have a team meeting, and they'll explain to people that it's important for them to show their independent judgment in the right place at the right time. But while the leader is making that announcement, everybody in the room is sitting there, sitting on their hands. They're wondering whether this leader really means this. Are they really serious about this, or is this just giving lip service? So they're not too sure about it. So because they're not too sure about it, they're very cautious to show their independent judgment. And this is where we get to stage 3. The employees don't show independent judgment because they're not really sure whether this is just words or whether the leader really means it. So there's a vacuum there, and the leader notices this vacuum. It's not being filled. The leader was hoping that people would fill the vacuum by demonstrating independent judgment. They're not doing it. So what happens is the leader fills the vacuum because they think that their team members, for whatever reason, aren't prepared to show independent judgment. And because they fill the vacuum, the team members themselves notice the leader filling the vacuum. They notice the leader jumping in and doing the work that's required. And what happens is it confirms in their mind, they think to themselves, my manager doesn't really want me to show independent judgment. And because of that, I'm confirmed. It's been confirmed that I shouldn't actually show my independent judgment, because if the leader really wanted me to show independent judgment, they wouldn't be jumping in and doing the work that they think I should be doing. And this is a paradox, and it goes on in the world of work everywhere. And of course, it's a communication breakdown, essentially, between the leader and the team members. So I'm going to share with you a way of breaking this proactive paradox. And as I mentioned earlier, this is about the concept of job crafting. So let's have a look at it in a bit more detail. But before I do that, of course, just to sum up the paradox, first of all, there's agreement, because both the manager and the employee wants independent judgment. Then there's skepticism, and then there's confirmation. There's confirmation that the manager doesn't really want employees to show independent judgment, because the manager fills that vacuum. So that's what we call this is what we call the proactive paradox. Now, let me talk about the concept of job crafting, because it's a very interesting concept. Now, what actually it entails is this, and I'll obviously share a couple of examples with you, but job crafting is where, and it happens anyway, whether we do it deliberately or not, but when you come into a job, the very first, after a short period of time, of course, you're given a job description. There are things that you have to do on that job description. But what actually happens is that you tend to gravitate to the things that you enjoy doing and move away from the things you don't enjoy. So perhaps out of sheer discipline, you might do the things you don't enjoy. Say, for example, paperwork or writing reports. Let's say you don't enjoy them. You do them because they're on your job description. But of course, what you do is you gravitate to the things that you enjoy, and you do this subconsciously. So for example, if you enjoy interactions with customers or clients or whatever you want to call them, if you enjoy that, it's likely that you're going to find opportunities to do more of that. So what it means is that if you're in the same job for about 2 years, by the end of that 2 years, the job has actually changed. Maybe the job description is still the same, but the job itself has actually changed because the individual gravitates to the things that they enjoy. Now, what I'm suggesting is that we should be doing this in a far more deliberate way, because it's natural. And not only is it natural, if people enjoy certain things in their job, there's a high correlation between what people enjoy and what they're good at. So it's likely that people will spend time doing the things that they enjoy, and because they enjoy it, they're probably good at it. So all we're trying to do with job crafting in a very deliberate sense is get people to do more of this in a very deliberate way. So let's look at the example of Paul. So Paul works in IT in the customer support area. So he's not really, doing the technical stuff, but he's very much working in customer support. And he spends most of his time helping on the helpline. But his passion is actually to improve new software. So through his discussions with his manager, Paul joins a group that tests new applications before they're launched in the company. So their manager agrees that this is a good idea, and Paul goes off and does that. This takes up about 3 hours every month. Now, while Paul's role doesn't substantially change through job crafting, so he's still obviously looking after customer support, he's delighted that he's using his skills and passion for analysis in new applications and the fact that it's been recognized. So that's a very deliberate attempt to give Paul the opportunity to job craft. And you'll notice that one of the things that happens there is there's a communication between the manager and Paul, and they both come to the conclusion that Paul would benefit, and so would the applications benefit, with Paul doing more of that. Let's look at some other examples, but before I do that, let's just look at what job crafting actually is. There are 3 dimensions of job crafting, and I'll just run through these. So when you're given a job description, what are those things that are open to job crafting? The most obvious example is task crafting. Now, task crafting is actually where you either add on or bolt on more tasks that are applicable to your strengths, or perhaps you remove some tasks and delegate those to somebody else. So in effect, task crafting is looking at the key performance areas of your job description and perhaps doing more or less of those, or perhaps doing other things that are outside the key result areas. Now, that's the most obvious form of job crafting, task crafting, and it's the most apparent because it's obvious whether it's being done or not done. So that's one area, the most popular area, but there are 2 other areas where job crafting can be very valuable. Now, let's look at the one on the bottom right-hand corner, which is relational crafting. Now, relational crafting is where the person in the job actually redefines the relationships with the stakeholders that they work with, both within and outside the organization, to do their job more effectively. So, for example, they might, they might build good working relationships with one team that perhaps they're not working, that there's very little communication going on between them. And so what happens is they start to look at the relationships that their job is dependent on. And so relational crafting is where they recraft the relationships for that person to perhaps do their job more effectively. So that's another area. And a third area is the most interesting of all, and that's called cognitive crafting. Now, cognitive crafting is really about the individual employee looking at their job purpose differently. So if someone looks at their job purpose differently, they're going to deal with it differently. It's going to energize them. So, for example, a person, say, as an accountant, will look at their job perhaps in the early stages as being an accountant. It's basically to produce budgets and to, basically, help a business to, monitor their costs and monitor their revenues. However, if that accountant considers their job as a problem solver rather than an accountant, then it's going to shape that job differently, because as a problem solver, they're probably likely to ask more interesting questions. They're probably likely to not just react to what the customer wants, but rather to actually be more proactive with the customer. So there's basically 3 different types of crafting, and each of those actually shapes or reshapes the job to suit the strengths of the person who's doing the job. Here's another example of job crafting. And let's consider Harry. Now, Harry is a bus driver, and Harry basically decides to give helpful sightseeing advice while traveling his regular route from the airport to the city. So basically, if you look at Harry's job is to ferry people basically from the airport to the city, and he does this on a regular basis. But he decides to cognitively craft his job differently. He's mindful that many of his passengers are from out of town. So Harry perceives his job as more than driving a bus. So in other words, he has cognitively recrafted his job. By using his local knowledge, and it's extensive, Harry decides to use his extroverted personality to good effect. So he decides to add sightseeing to his primary task of driving a bus. So you can see in this example that Harry has cognitively crafted his job. He has thought differently. He doesn't see himself exclusively as a bus driver. And because he's playing to his strengths, which is that he enjoys, pointing out the different sites on the way to the city, he's adding value to his job. He's probably going to be more engaged in his job. He's adding greater value, and people are going to get more out of that. So when you look at the workplace and the world of work that you're working in, there are basically three particular groups of people that I believe are prime for job crafting. Because you might be asking the question, where do I start? I like the idea of job crafting. I'm not sure where to start. I'd suggest the first place to start is with your own job. Whether you're a manager or an employee, you can certainly consider that in a more deliberate way and start to think, well, can I change the tasks? Can I change the way I think about the job? Can I actually change the relationships or improve the relationships that I have with the people that I require the information from to do my job? But if you think about it, older workers, older employees are primed for job crafting. They're obviously at the end of their career and they have a lot to offer. Many older employees have incredible tacit knowledge about how to do jobs, how to actually complete the work that they're doing in their industry because they've been doing it for many, many years, sometimes decades. Now, those people probably keep that information to themselves, but if they're encouraged by their manager to mentor younger workers and basically get into a coaching relationship with some of the workers, they're probably going to add more value to what they're doing. And so they become as kind of a workplace mentor to younger workers. And that puts a spring in their step. It gives them an opportunity to share their knowledge and to do it in a way that's going to be useful for the people on the receiving end. Employees with disabilities or health problems in the workplace are another prime area for job crafting, and for the simple reason that these people perhaps may not be capable of completing what's on their job description, because remember, a job description is generic. It's not really crafted for the individual doing the job holder. It's more crafted for, anybody basically that comes into that job. Now, if someone's got a disability or perhaps someone's got a health problem, then it may well be possible to craft their job to better suit those limitations. And so that would be another area where I think job crafting would be extremely useful. Now, a third area would be young parents with young children, particularly female employees. Now, any of us who've had young children would understand the constraints that puts on us. It's time consuming and we've got to juggle work and home. It's difficult at the best of times, but when you've got young children, it's even more difficult. So in this instance here, it would be a case of the looking at the job and saying, how can we craft it to accommodate the needs you have as a parent of young children? So that would be an obvious place where job crafting would be very, very valuable. So there are three areas. Now, I'm not suggesting they're the only areas. I think everybody's open to the possibilities of job crafting. But if you're looking at starting somewhere, that would be a great place to start in these three groups. But basically, anybody can start at this, this level. And you might say, well, how do I start? Well, I'll share that with you in a moment, but I think the first thing is to have an awareness of your job description and to consider it in the light of your strengths and opportunities for growth. And then look at it and then have a conversation with your manager about that. And so you can negotiate some of the things that can be job crafted, perhaps on your job description, which of course is a task crafting, or perhaps relational crafting with people who you have to perhaps build better, more robust relationships with, both within and outside the organization. And of course, the other area is to think completely differently about the job itself. So let's have a look at this in more detail. But before I do that, one more example of job crafting. So let's take Marilyn. Now, Marilyn is an architect who specializes in designing offices for large companies. So she's, her specialty is office design. So she goes out of her way to organize several informal meetings with her clients on a new office design project. So she's not just going to go ahead and design that. She's going to have meetings, a range of meetings. And during these meetings, Marilyn, instead of looking at the current office layout, observes the way people actually work. So she's watching them work. She's watching how they interact with each other. And after several visits, Marilyn changes the office design based on her observations and her interactions with customers. So in other words, she's crafting in a relational sense here, because she's building up relationships with her clients. She's understanding how they operate. And because she's understanding how they operate through her observations and her willingness to meet with them on a regular basis, she has the capacity then to develop a design that's more applicable for the nature of the work from that office or that business. So there's an example. So job crafting, really, if you were trying to implement this in your own organization, and you can do this on a team level, or you can do it on an organizational wide level, it's really up to you. But if you think about job crafting, the very first thing you probably need to do is give people training so that they understand what job crafting is and what the benefits are for them as individuals and for the organization. So you need to provide them with some training so there's a greater awareness and understanding of what job crafting actually entails. Then I suggest you give people a week to record their work activities. Now, why a week? Well, I think a week, usually what happens in a week is pretty representative of what people do, unless it's an extraordinary week. So by getting people to record their work activities for a week, you've actually got some data there so that individuals actually can not just guess, but actually know what they've done during a week. What meetings have they attended? What activities have they done? How long they've spent on email? Who have they met with? And all of this information is recorded for a week. So that's step two. Now, step three is to get the individual to reflect on that and to actually ask themselves the question, what are some things that I've done during the week that perhaps were very valuable? And what were some things during the week that perhaps were less valuable? And how might I change the focus on my work based on the information I've got in front of me and my reflections on that information? And then the next step is to sit down with the manager and talk that through so that there is a job crafting plan in place. Now, the manager, the important thing here is that the initiative for job crafting comes from the individual employee. It should not come from the manager. It should come from the employee. The employee should have skin in the game here. They should make up their own minds about how their work can be done better, faster, easier, whatever it might be. And then they sit down with their manager and work their way through that. So that's the essence of how you might go about implementing a job crafting program in your organization. And if you want more information about that, just contact me and I'm more than happy to work with you to implement those 4 steps in your own team or organization, depending on what it is. Okay, so that's a little bit about how you can redesign work to improve performance. And I can assure you there are many examples where people have improved their performance by being a little more flexible on the work that they do, by tinkering with the job description. Okay. So what I want to do, you might be aware, some of you are loyal supporters and join every Friday, but if not, next Friday at this time, always at this time, I have another session, which I'm going to talk about replacing the job description to accelerate performance. Now, I'm not a big fan of the job description. I think it's well past its use by date. And I think the job description causes more problems, more harm than good. And what I'm going to suggest is an alternative next week. So stay tuned for that. And if you'd like to register for that, there's the registration link. And of course, I'll be sending you a copy of the slides and the recording at the end of this presentation. So you just click on that link. And as you did today, you'll be in, and we'll see you next Friday at 10 a.m. Now, before I finish up, I said I'd offer you a special offer, and this is the offer. So my book, The Future of Human Resources, Unlocking Human Potential, has just been released. It's going really well. If you look on Amazon, for example, it'll be $39 plus postage if you want to purchase it through Amazon. However, if you purchase it through me today, I will give you that book for $29 plus postage. And all you've got to do in order to take advantage of that offer is just send me an email today. You just send me an email and just say, Tim, I'd like a copy of the book, please. I will sign it for you and I'll send it out with an invoice, and you'll get that for $10 less than you would have to purchase it online. So that's my offer. I hope you'd like to take advantage of that. So thank you, everyone. I'll just stop sharing for the moment. Thank you. I've enjoyed our time together. Look forward to seeing you next Friday, and start thinking about job crafting, because I believe its time has arrived post-COVID. I think there's wonderful opportunities for us to very much deliberately craft our jobs to take advantage of our own innate talents and to improve performance. And that is the essence of job crafting. So thanks, everyone. All the best. Look forward to catching you next Friday, and have a wonderful weekend. We'll see you next Friday. Thank you, everyone, and goodbye.